Thank you, Deepak. And it's a pleasure to be here with you and the entire audience today. And what an exciting way to end our day. And what an exciting day it has been for InventionCon 2022. I hope that our audience has enjoyed some of the remarkable speakers who have shared their experience, expertise, and insights. What better way to learn than from the journeys of those who have paved the way and who are willing to share their successes and failures for your benefit. This next panel, Bringing Home InventionCon, day number 2, is no different. You're going to hear from 4 extremely inspiring people about their careers, their visions, and their drives to succeed in challenging fields. I hope you leave this session feeling moved and motivated, that you too can pursue a dream and create innovation which leads to a better future for us all. Speaking of inspiration to impact, it was on this day in 1942 that famed Hollywood actress Hedy Lamarr and co-inventor George Antheil received a patent for a frequency hopping technique that today is referenced as an important development in the field of wireless communications. Today, Hedy Lamarr's technologies are still used in devices we use at home and at work, and the market value of her invention is said to be in excess of $30 billion. So while for Hedy, acting was her profession, inventing was her passion. Let's turn now to our 4 panelists and learn about their passions and their pursuit of invention, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Jimena Hartsock, who is the CEO and founder of Build Within. Second is Dr. Bill Kedia, who is the CEO of MedAir Labs. We also have with us today Matthew Tamayo Rios, who is the CEO and founder of Open Lattice. And last but not least by any means is Amin Rad, my apologies, Amin, who is the CEO and founder of Encapsulate. It is my pleasure to introduce this exciting panel to you and to turn to some questions for each of the panelists, which I hope you will find engaging and exciting. We're going to start with Jimena. Jimena, can you please tell the audience a bit about yourself, your background, and what made you take your entrepreneurship journey towards apprenticeship?
Thank you for having me, Elizabeth, and USPTO. It's an honor to be here today with these incredible inventors and entrepreneurs, and also be listened from this audience that probably had a lot of other things to do and chose to be with us today. So thank you. So my accent is imported from Chile. I was born and raised there and came to the US a little bit over 20 years ago. I was an education major, a school principal, assistant superintendent of schools, and then I had a career change to technology, where I co-founded a company that it was very successful, exited, and I had that startup success that many of us dream when we're entrepreneurs. That gave me the experience for this second company. For that company and for this company, I was really just someone trying to solve a problem. And Build Within is a solution to some of the issues we have today with the gap between great jobs and people. And so apprenticeships, which have been used for years and years in trade and construction, we're using now as a model for the training of new people into technology jobs. So Build Within, as the name says, is building from within, from people's already innate abilities and anything that they bring from their lives. And we use the apprenticeship model to transfer those skills and bridge employers with people.
Thank you, Jimena. We look forward to learning more about Build Within in your journey. What a great introduction. Thank you so much. Next, for Bill. Bill, you founded your company, MedAir Labs, in response to the pandemic. Can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to create MedAir Labs?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. Really looking forward to the opportunity to explain a bit about our company and our journey and how we got here. So, by trade, I'm a primary care physician. I've been in practice for over 20 years. And when COVID first hit, back to the uncertainty of late 2019, early 2020, we had people coming into our office and we didn't know what they had, whether they had COVID, whether they had influenza, upper respiratory tract infection. So I found myself putting 2, 3, 4 swabs in people's noses, their mouths. And throughout all of this process, I kept thinking to myself, there has to be a better way of doing this. So we've created a proprietary rapid test that tests for multiple viruses with one swab, results in 10 to 15 minutes with the accuracy of a PCR test. So from that springboarded our journey, or started our journey to where we found a device that effectively neutralizes coronaviruses, of which the COVID virus is a coronavirus. So we've seen real world success with this device. We've seen real world success with our testing kit. And now we're looking at expanding and moving beyond COVID and using innovative technology in the healthcare setting to improve the quality of care being delivered both in the office setting and at home.
Thank you, Bill. And I know our world certainly thanks you for all those who are fighting against this pandemic, seeking solutions to any aspect of the pandemic. We greatly appreciate your invention and innovation. For Armin, you are also in the medical field. Can you please tell us about yourself and what inspired you to work in this field?
Absolutely. Glad to be here with these wonderful panelists. My name is Armin Raad. I am CEO and co-founder of Encapsulate. And prior to starting this journey at Encapsulate, I got my PhD in the field of biomedical engineering from the University of Connecticut. And prior to that, I had an undergrad and master's in tissue regeneration and tissue engineering. I also got a master's in MBA as well. But what happened for me was that I started my research studies since I was a freshman. I was always very intrigued by, doing this kind of research. I tried to change my field of interest and research, pretty much every couple of years. So I started from bone implants, and then for my master's, I went to tissue regeneration, specifically for liver and liver transplantation. And then during my PhD, I started working on cancer and nanomedicine. So I try to kind of diversify, what I am working on. And pretty much, all of those experiences helped me to develop this technology with my colleagues. And, since 2018, we started this company. And just very briefly, what Encapsulate does is that we are in the field of cancer precision medicine. And that means what we do, we have developed a smart biochip technology in which we can grow patient tumor specimens outside of the body, create miniature microcopies of the actual tumors outside the body. And prior to any kind of treatment, we can test all the possible options for each patient and let the oncologist make the best and most effective treatment for each patient.
I have to tell you, we are yet to arrive at our fourth panelist, but are about to do so. I see that you all are not tackling the world's small problems. You're all tackling the world's large problems, and we're very lucky that you're doing so. For Matthew, you are also a scientist, but in contrast to Bill and Armin, you went the engineering route, which many of our audience, I'm sure, can appreciate. What makes an engineer decide to create a company like OpenLattice, which provides tools for those who serve the public?
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me. Really for me, I've always been interested in having impact, but I majored in math and computer science, and I did my master's in applied mathematics at the University of Washington. and I was trying to really figure out what I wanted to do sort of with my life. And one of the problems I came across, just pure happenstance, I was working at a company that had a lot of work with state and local governments, and what kept coming up was that these governments had these very large and like deep data sets on all the individuals they interact with, and yet they really struggle to use that to provide services as effectively as they could, and to make more informed decisions around some of the most vulnerable people in society who need the most help. So for me, it was an opportunity to be able to tackle some of these problems and work with a really incredible set of people to basically try to help build tools for state and local governments who are tackling issues around criminal justice, homelessness, education, child welfare. And so really it was just like an incredible journey to be able to use my math skills and my sort of data science background to be able to help provide the tools they need to really deliver those services in a more precision and targeted fashion.
That's fascinating, Matthew. Thank you. And I hope we have some young people on our program today to have it as a takeaway that how creatively one can use an educational background, how one can turn it and shape it in a number of different ways to outside of perhaps some of the traditional roles. Turning back to Armin, how did the idea for Encapsulate form, and how long did it take to materialize? I'm sure it wasn't an overnight project by any means.
It truly was, and I think this would be a good story for especially the younger audience who wants to start, a similar journey. So when I started my PhD back in 2014, I had this idea: what helps the tumor cells to keep growing and keep maintain like their viability in a long time. And one of the major things that they need is like red blood cells, right? So I designed a nanocarrier at that time during my PhD, which was looking exactly like red blood cell, but in a smaller size, so it can penetrate toward the tumor. And then I tested that with 55 or probably 60 different drugs. So it was like a universal nanocarrier. And the idea was, okay, we can have this as a general platform, as a smart nanocarrier, and any drug and any pharma can come and be encapsulated inside this nanocarrier and be used inside the body without bothering the rest of the body, which that part of the chemotherapy side effects are coming from. So that was the main idea. And then when I started the conversation with clinicians and oncologists that I had like collaboration with, I figured out that what happens in the clinic is pretty much a try and error, and we don't have any tool available. So then I thought that, okay, if I had like patents and everything, like all these solid evidences for that project, but then I saw that the real problems that we have in the clinic is a little bit more basic. And I thought that, okay, if I was developing a platform for testing my 60 different drugs and different nanocarriers that I was developing instead of, just using animal models. And I thought that, okay, if I can test my drugs with that model, why can't I like use the same model for commercially available and chemotherapy that is being prescribed in the clinic? So we started from there. It pivoted completely. Back in 2017-18, we started with this idea, and then we saw that there is like a full correlation between the results that we get and what is happening in the clinic. And then from there, Encapsulate pivoted a little bit. Instead of going after like a nanocarrier, we focused on developing a more smart and more robust platform, which can kind of create tumors very fast and maintain the behavior and kind of replicate what we have. And instead of just testing different treatments on patient's body and let the tumor grow with like ineffective treatments, we just go with the very best option right at the beginning.
It's fascinating. And the idea behind trial and error is something which I think a lot of our audience as inventors and innovators can really feel and associate with, recognizing that sometimes the first solution isn't the right solution, and that sometimes it's a long journey.
Mhm.
So for Jimena, Phone to Action, now Capital Canary, is the software that literally put the power to change the world in the palms of people's hands. Please tell us, what does this mean and how does Phone to Action work?
So phone to action is just like the name, is using the phone or a computer or any device to connect with your lawmakers. And the idea was born in 2012 out of my work as an education reformer. So I mentioned earlier that I used to be a school principal. I was assistant superintendent of schools as well. And I had a passion for education. And in talking with parents and trying to get them to talk to lawmakers, I realized that that didn't scale and the technology was necessary to democratize the lobbying that occur here in the U.S. And so it was an idea. I actually was driving from Sacramento to San Francisco, and I had I drove and it was a pothole, and I thought it should be something right here that could read my location and connect it to the lawmaker that is responsible for getting me almost a flat tire. And everything started connecting. I was doing events, and I thought, it would be so great that after this speech by someone very inspiring, and people will ask, what can we do to help? That will have a technology for people to take action. So Phone to Action was that. It was at a click, a person can connect with their lawmakers. And you may have not heard about Phone to Action or Capital Canary, but you certainly have heard about the movements that the technology powers. It was the very first software as a service digital grassroots advocacy technology. It powers organizations such as the Kidney Association, Alzheimer's Association, American Heart Association, companies like Lyme, celebrities like Ariana Grande, Beyonce, because Phone to Action not only helps people influence lawmakers in legislation and regulation, but also Phone to Action helps people register to vote. And in the last election, through Phone to Action, more than 10 million registrations to vote happen. So it's a really transformative technology. I wrote the patent for it. I was awarded the patent by the USPTO. So something that came from a very simple idea is today a very large company, Capital Canary, owns a legislative tracking technology as well as a major big data technology. So very proud of that, but it started, as a very simple idea.
What a beautiful story of bringing the power to the people, certainly. And if only every pothole could lead to such great results. Unfortunately, many just lead to, as you said, a flat tire. You can't predict where inspiration is going to come from, can we?
For Matthew, how important is IP for you and your company, Open Lattice? Have you patented any of your technologies?
So just right off the bat, Open Lattice, one of the key pieces of our stack, which is basically the component that allows us to bring together data from an individual that's spread out across a bunch of different data sets. So what's really frequently common in government is you might have like public safety, health and human services, education, child welfare. And so the picture of someone is not all in one place, and they're all provided by different vendors. And very often these systems don't interop with each other. So we needed a way using the common demographic information that's collected by all of these systems to match up those individuals so that we could build out a complete profile of that individual to support decision making by both policymakers and by like folks who are doing like the day-to-day operational stuff, like in the trenches on child welfare and healthcare. And so that piece, it's basically advanced record linkage. We took the slightly different approach where rather than sort of looking at a bunch of different records and trying to come up with the rules and heuristics to match them ourselves, we're like, hey, deep learning has advanced a lot. Why don't we apply deep learning to the problem of linking individuals across these data sets and let the machine learn the rules for linking the individuals? So up to the point where we came in, the majority of like the published literature was basically equivalent to using Bayesian inference to match up whether people are the same. And so we actually, I think we're one of the first folks to use a multi-layer neural network to actually do that matching. So IP is very important to our company. That's just one piece of it. Not all of it is in the form of patents. And in fact, a big chunk of our code base is open source. So I think just thinking about like which pieces are the key pieces to protect for what time span and including it as part of your strategy as a business is really important. Right? Because it has to be like, for example, the stuff that's open source is we want to be able to have other people to be able to tap into it. And so when interoperability is important, we specifically like license that IP in a way that made it accessible to everybody. And then for the stuff that's super key that we needed to establish a moat to try to grow the business, that is where we pursued a more patent or sometimes copyright-based approach.
Matthew, just a quick follow-up. Something that's often not talked about or perhaps is well known for some of our novice inventors or innovators is the concept of a trade secret. Is that something that's been part of your business strategy as well?
I think that the trade secrets are kind of like implicit. It hasn't been an explicitly part of it, but usually what happens is when you're building like a web service or an application that's going to get deployed at scale, you end up with like de facto trade secrets of just like accumulated internal knowledge of how do you get this thing, how do you deploy it on AWS. Like, yes, there are the tools like Kubernetes and a bunch of other stuff like that to make it easier. But when you actually start like digging into doing the work, it's very similar to like a story I heard about like the original rockets that went to the moon, where we can't actually build those rockets. And it's not because we don't have all the schematics and the designs for building those rockets, but it's because the welders and all the people who did like the fine tuning and the work to actually make the rocket run have either retired or passed away. And so even though in theory we have all the plans, actually getting the actual entire system to run and hum, there's a bunch of invisible sort of trade secrets baked into the knowledge of the individual people on the ground making it work. So we haven't explicitly used it, but I think it naturally arises if you're doing something hard and challenging in a fast-paced startup environment.
Thank you, Matthew. That's really insightful. And I appreciate your analogy to the early space rockets. I think there's a lot to that. For Bill, your ideas develop from your passion to help people. And we've seen this passion to help others across our panel today. How difficult do you think it is to stay focused on your main goal of helping people without getting distracted by the business side? Or how do you keep that balance? Because obviously you have a lot of responsibilities in the entrepreneurial business side that some people might find less sexy or interesting as that goal of an objective of helping people.
Of course. So I always go back to my experience as a physician. When I finished my residency, I was hired by the group that hired me. And 8 months into my career, the owner of the practice comes up to me and says, "Hey, I'm moving to Oregon. Do you want to buy the practice or do you want to find a new job?" So, after about 5 days of freaking out and figuring out what am I going to do, sat down, calmly looked at all the data and decided we're going to go ahead and buy the practice. At the time I purchased the practice, we only had about 3,000 active patients. Over the course of my career, say about 20 years, we grew that practice from 3,000 to over 30,000 active patients. So how do you do that? And it's the same response. I guess it's the response to your question, is that if you provide quality care, a quality service, a quality product, the business side of things will take care of themselves. It's a natural outlay. It's a natural consequence of providing quality. So in our current venture in MedAire, it's the exact same principle. We have a quality product, two quality products, two superior products that speak for themselves. The business side inevitably follows that quality. If you can provide a better test that's as accurate as a PCR, in some cases more accurate than PCR, and I can give you a result in 10 minutes with ease of comfort and ease of use, that beats anything that's currently on the market. If I can provide a device that effectively neutralizes the virus that causes COVID, how is that not a quality product that inevitably brings business along with it? So I think as long as you can keep that fact in mind, that if you have a quality, whatever it may be, service, product, everything else will follow along from that.
I remember in 2012 when I would tell people that I was starting a tech startup around helping people connect with their lawmakers. They would look at me like, why are you doing that? What is that? That sounds like a nonprofit. Investors wouldn't understand that. They turn around and say, nobody was giving me a penny for it. And we figured out a business model for that idea. And today is a huge market. A company called Fiscal Note IPO last week, based in this market that we were pioneers. And so I think the rules around what is a business that you can actually make money via for profit and at the same time do good have changed. And I think we have modernized our thinking around, yes, you can do you can do good to people, you can help people, and at the same time, you can create a business that creates jobs, because that's another way to help people. And the balance is that an entrepreneur has to have both in mind. If you only build a company for the financial aspect, that company eventually will die. And we have leaders today, like the founder of Salesforce, that has ingrained in the business DNA of the company how to give back in tangible ways. And so I think we're in a new era and in a different way of doing businesses. And for those entrepreneurs out there, the easiest way to actually make this balance is to start a company, to create something, because you can lead the way and set the morals and the goals of this company and make sure that that's both. That makes money is okay to make money. In the past, used to be like, oh, you can't do good for society and at the same time make money. Like you have to be super poor and like be in the streets helping people. Well, no longer that. I mean, you need power and influence and money to help more people. And we see it today, day in and day out, with like all the billionaires giving back. So yeah, balance to me comes from thinking about both, not in a separate way, but united.
Thank you, Bill and Jimena. I love this discussion of balance and what's acceptable and what are the new rules in businesses that help people. It's such a fascinating question. I wonder if Matthew or Armin, do either of you want to also jump in before we transition to another question?
I think I will just echo what Jimena and Bill said. That was pretty right on the point.
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that one.
Okay, certainly. Well, I've got more questions, so we'll just keep going. At this point in our conversation, we are in fact going to transition to questions that I open and welcome the entire panel to comment on if you feel comfortable and have insights that you'd like to share with our audience. And our first question, and again, it's open to any and all of you to jump in, is, and I love this one because it really goes to kind of your mental thinking and where you are as a creator, would you agree that innovation starts with a dream? If so, this room, our virtual room, is probably full of dreamers. And what advice would you have for those who have just started dreaming and are all fired up about making an impact with their innovation? You can answer this question by giving words of encouragement of how to start, or resources you've used that have helped you take it from dream to reality. Please feel free to address the question with any insights you'd like to share.
So I think, once you have that thought, that eureka moment, like, why hasn't anyone thought about this before? This is such a great idea, such a great possibility. I think the first step is you have to then come up with some kind of concrete plan as to how to bring that dream into reality. We've all had thoughts like, oh my God, why isn't this, that, this? And then when you actually start to flesh that idea out, when you start looking at how can I make this, become a reality, if you don't have a concrete plan, I think that's where you see a lot of these ideas, good, bad, or ugly, die in essence. So I think having that first step is critically important. And the second piece, I think, which is equally as important, is having a sounding board. You have to have people that you trust, that you can run your thoughts, your ideas by, that they can provide guidance. And hopefully it's people close to you that are part of your life, or whether it's on a personal level or on a business level, that can provide some insight and wisdom as to how to proceed with your thoughts and your ideas. And quite frankly, like our group right here, the four of us, I think we've all had that ability, whether it's a mentor at the university level, whether it's a mentor at the business level. Everybody has access. It's just moving forward with that idea and talking to people.
I think the dream word, sometimes it can make us think about something very utopic or ethereal or not very real. But people who dream, especially about products, about companies, are very curious and alert about our environment. So we're questioning constantly what's around us. We never believe what we hear. We confirm. I think you find like in this group, there are three researchers and inventors and have been a part of academia. But if you look at people that didn't even finish college, who are successful entrepreneurs, they were all very curious and they all challenged the status quo. So that dream that you have out there, if you don't have a dream right now, look in front of you. What is it that you do every day that is a problem out there that bothers you? Try to think about ways to fix it. And that's where ideas for products come from. And ideas are nothing without execution. And I think in that, the patent process makes us think very much in the same way that when you write a dissertation, what is the gap in the knowledge? What is the gap in what people need that they don't have? But having the idea of that is nothing. It's actually building that product, testing that product, creating that solution, what makes that a success, in my opinion. If you look at in the past, Leonardo da Vinci, all of the first inventors, they were also artists. They were manufacturers. They did all these things. And we only hear about their ideas, but they use their hands, constantly, because you see that they're like, how this person had time to do all these things? If you start reading their bios, it's because they were curious and they were interacting with their environment. And you ask for an advice. My advice is always to try to exercise, what you have here. You don't need to have a college degree to be curious, but you can be curious about things that are not really going to motivate you to create something. So to be a creator, curiosity also has to be fostered around things that give that scaffold learning. In my own experience, I was born in Chile, very, very poor. And my father and my mother were Indian, indigenous, 100%. But I saw my father reading the paper every day, every single day. And that made me want to read. And I started reading books, not fiction so much, but books about anything, learning things, maps. And so I started learning things, and then everything kind of connected the dots. And when I came to the US, all of that learning that I did before helped me to do other things. And so I think dream, execution, and product like entrepreneurship cannot be done without learning. And learning is free today in the internet. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, start teaching yourself like no other time. You can actually be anything you want just by getting on Starbucks Wi-Fi, opening a Chromebook or an iPhone that costs less than $200, and learning about how the world works and how to fix it.
And certainly signing up for InventionCon.
That's right.
Armin or Matthew, would you like to jump in on this question?
Yes. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
All right. So I was going to take a slightly more tactical approach. So I think one of the really important things in making your dream a reality is to do a honest self-assessment of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and make sure you get the right people around you to actually make it a reality. Because it's as Bill said, you have to come up with a plan. And there may be steps in the plan that you may not be good or the best person at executing, and making sure you get someone who can execute really well on that part of the plan can often make the difference between success and failure. So whether it's a co-founder or whether the right executive hire or the right technical hire, or just getting the right people around you. It might be in my case, it's more likely to be making sure the right sales or marketing or business person is there to help me. It is really, really important to building that end-to-end picture and building something that scales. Now there are probably projects and stuff that could be done as one person, but I think as you're tackling bigger and more complicated things, it just becomes more than what a single individual can accomplish, and really getting a good team together becomes a really important factor in sort of building out your dream.
Yeah, just to add on 2 more points, 2 more advices for the audience. I think I want to echo what Jimena said about learning as many things as possible, get exposure to as many topics as possible. You never know how diversifying can help you. Just as an example, the way that we do the image analysis, which is very unique, the way that we do at Encapsulate came from, when we were learning how astronomy image analysis works, or the way that we grow the tissue came not from our studies in cancer nanomedicine. It came from tissue engineering that we learned previously. And getting exposure, especially if you are prior to the execution mode and you're still in the learning mode, getting exposure to as many topics as you can and diversifying your knowledge will definitely help you a lot. The second advice that I do have is to get connected with the stakeholders of the field that you are working on, or the project or the idea that you're working on, as soon as possible. And I can guarantee you that there are more players than you think initially. I mean, for a biotech project or just an app, there are tens of different roles that may affect you, and getting exposure to those people, start a conversation, share with them your general idea, and see their feedback. See if that is a real pain down the road. And if everything goes fine, I'm sorry, I'll take care of it later on. But so I was super stationary.
Ocean activated lights. There we go. What a great invention.
So long story short, I mean, get exposure to those stakeholders would help you a lot, and would let you learn fast and fail fast if that's something that you need to do down the road.
They say learn fast, fail fast, recover faster, right?
Indeed. Boy, I know this session is being recorded, so people will have the opportunity to listen to it again and again, but I really hope our audience captured these nuggets of valuable information, because this right here is the list that should be on everyone's refrigerator door that they look at each and every day as they contemplate starting and building and growing a business. We still have a little bit of time left, so we're going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions. And this one's, Armin, since you ended the last round, I'm going to have you start this round. And the question is, can you pinpoint a moment or decision that changed the course of your entrepreneurial journey? And hopefully it changed it for the best, but sometimes we recognize that failure is a kickoff point as well.
I can give you a good example, I think, on that. So 3 years ago, we were approached by NASA and International Space Station about like a project that for the first time, we grow cancer patients' tumors up in the space station. This was a research project, obviously, it was interesting, but a little bit different from our approach of, going to clinic and going to hospital and everything. So we had this conversation and debate among the three co-founders that should we go with this option or no. And then the way that we reframed it and, proposed it to both International Space Station National Lab and NASA was that, because obviously you don't expect astronauts to do your cell culture and growing the cells for you. So we pivoted that project in a way that we framed it to make everything completely optimized and, have the remote access from Earth. And that's what we have done and we are currently doing up in the space station as well. So, I mean, the way that you look into a question or a project or an opportunity that is in front of you, you as like the CEO or manager of a startup, your role is like reframing and finding the best solution and the most optimized way to handle that. And, that was one of the biggest opportunities that we got so far. And, that actually opened up a lot of other opportunities in front of us.
Fascinating. Thank you. Who else would like to jump in on this question?
So in our development of our test kit, we going through the whole FDA process, and I've been on it on the pharmaceutical side, but being on the device side of trying to get through the FDA is nightmare. Sometimes is not the correct word. So they're very, very particular as to how you do this whole application process. So I think, retrospectively going back and looking at how we approached that whole application process and how we could have maybe use some advice from outside sources instead of thinking that, hey, we can do this ourselves and we can manage this process ourselves. I think that was the moment where if I could go back and do it all over again, I would say, again, going back to our original topic of looking for resources outside of your area of expertise that can help. Exactly what Matthew was saying, recognizing your weakness. I think that was our pinpoint moment where we realized we could have expedited this whole process if we had stepped back, realized that we were not experts with dealing with the FDA. And part of that is actually a big chunk of that is on me, because I've had intimate working relationship with the FDA, with drug development and so on and so forth with pharma. But as I said, it's a very different prospect when you're going down the device manufacturing side. So just to echo again, Matthew, what you were saying, recognize your weakness and lean on people who know what they're doing when you don't know what you're doing.
Indeed. Matthew, Jimena, either of you want to offer some thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I think I agree 100% with those comments. Is the hardest thing, I think, the first time around for the first company is to actually not know what you're good at and how to complement. And so there's kind of like a rule of thumb now for startups. You need a user person, like the customer advocate. The person that normally had the idea is the one that, is going to be closer to the user than a financial person and a tech person. So you have 3 co-founders, and that's that. A lot of folks feel that they have to give their ideas away, the equity, and that kind of stuff. And I didn't have that issue with my co-founders, but I've seen it a lot. The one thing that for me actually helped me be an entrepreneur is a little bit of a twist on your question, is that I didn't know a lot. And so because I didn't know a lot, but I knew about technology entrepreneurship, so I didn't know what to be afraid of. I was, I think, a little bit more defiant about the fact that I thought we had to build this. And because the idea was something so unusual for investors to believe in, for any developer to come and join, it felt like a nonprofit. It felt like a text message. The name is it a text message company? People will say. So, but for me, what made me an entrepreneur, what changed my journey as a person, was the fact that I had done things before that gave me the confidence that this idea was actually sound, that the problem existed. So Armen said this earlier, that you have to diversify your knowledge and your experiences is incredibly important. Some people are lucky at 23, coming out, have a company. Those are the ones that show up on the cover of TechCrunch. But that's not the rule. That's not the standard. Most people fail a lot of times before having a success. And so I think entrepreneurial journey is so long and so hard and so painful that having a few experiences before you start is going to make that entrepreneurial first company easier, because you have things to piggyback from. So for example, I knew budgeting, I knew operations, I could read a legal document and a contract and change it myself. We didn't have to hire all those people. And then my co-founders had also other skills, and we put it together. But I went from education to tech entrepreneurship without any transition, none, from one day to the other. But what helped me and what made that journey possible, it was all the transferable skills and knowledge I had acquired before.
Excellent. Matthew?
This is not advice per se, but one of the most challenging things on like finding this point in this decision making is actually knowing when you should be pushing against the grain and then knowing when to listen, right? Because just naturally it's like you're doing something that challenges the status quo, but sometimes the status quo exists for a reason, and if you don't gain that understanding of when you need to listen versus when you need to push, you can make life a lot harder for yourself. And also you miss out on you miss out on a lot of signals that can inform your business strategy. And think of a specific thing, and this is very specific to state and local governments. As Jimena has said a few times, it's like investors look at it and like, oh, it's like a nonprofit. It's very hard to build business in it. And it is super challenging. And one of the reasons it's super challenging is because initially when you look, you're like, oh, why don't they have good technology? Or why don't they just do X, Y, Z? I'm like, if you come in thinking, hey, I'm just going to bring a better technology, and because they have bad technology and resources, they'll just adopt it. You will just get completely miss the mark. Because what ends up happening is you have to understand the structure of government and how, and I'm speaking specifically state and local, and how the people who work there get promoted and how they make decisions and how the decision makers think, how the budgeting process works, how they have to allocate money. So if you come in, you're like, I'm going to sell you this thing, and they've never heard of it before, and it's not something on their budget. It can be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but they still won't be able to buy it because they'll have to go to the county council or the city council and then a year-long budgeting process to allocate that money. And so you might be thinking like, I need to get them to use better technology. But the reason they don't use better technology is because of this larger systemic thing that you actually need to put into your business practice to make your dream a reality. It's just such a fine line to walk between knowing really when to push, and like you have to have, like as Jimena said, that curiosity to learn about all these different things. Because basically, if you're not a learning machine and not like constantly trying to understand the systems you're trying to change, sometimes you end up pushing in the wrong direction, and like that can be extremely frustrating and also lead to burnout and just being tired and not being able to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
What incredible pearls of wisdom shared with this very specific and challenging question. I think looking at the time, we have time for one last question. And given that the host of InventionCon is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, I've got to go with the obvious question. And it's one that I really want our audience to know and appreciate and understand your answer as they look to start and build and grow a business. And I'm going to start with Matthew, because Matthew, you've already touched on this slightly in one of your previous questions. You all lead successful businesses. How much do you think that owning intellectual property contributed to that success? And we'll start with Matthew.
I think IP is probably one of the most key pieces. It's a little bit less straightforward in tech, because if you go and you like pitch investors and like VCs, and you're like, hey, my entire company is just based around like this like one thing that I patented, you actually won't get like the response that you expect, because they'll say like, okay, well, that patent eventually expires, and the question they'll want you to answer is, what are you going to do with the time that this effective monopoly on using this tech to get to a point where you have built a large, enduring, sustainable business? So I'd say like patents and IPs are like a super key part of the strategy you need to because you need something, right? Like you need a way where you can build, because if you're going up, especially the larger the market or the more interesting or attractive the market to large companies, like they have a lot of different ways to make your life hard and difficult. And you need basically the breathing room to get established and basically have some time to actually develop your idea. Otherwise, literally the moment you go to market, right? Like if with Bill's like test, or with encapsulates like cancer solution, like some big company which has millions of dollars could throw like 100 people and just duplicate it, and then they start going and then selling that same thing, and they've got economies of scale, and they have the supply chain, and they have all these other things that they can bring to bear. And so I think IP for especially for like frontier or like especially in healthcare is extremely important to give you the time to sort of develop and mature as a company. And it applies in tech too. It just takes like you have to phrase it slightly differently. You can't just be like, hey, I have this patent, like, let me raise money so I can build it.
Yeah, I agree. I know yes, time when I want to let other people say something, but for startups, for example, IP, that is important, trademark. So many companies go there, they have a great name, and the name describes the product. That's not trademarkable. So easy, USPTO, just go on the website, that is a search where you can search trademarks. And then you don't have to go through changing names, changing your website, spending money, letting everyone know. All of that. So that's one. Second, trade secrets. Well, we talked a little bit about it before, but it's the way you do things that sometimes makes the whole difference in the business. Like in our new business, apprenticeships, they exist since 1937 in the US, but the way we do them in tech is what makes us special. So the know-how, that's super important. 3, the patent process to me was even as important as the patent itself, because it makes you think. I remember when I wrote my doctoral dissertation, I don't know, like probably all of you remember, like you close yourself inside these rooms and you put stickies everywhere and you have computers and you don't want to go anywhere because you're gonna forget your train of thought, and literature reviews are like you become an alien of yourself. But that, to me, the adrenaline that came from that, the excitement, is the same excitement I found in writing a patent. So those three things for startups, and I let someone else come in.
So I was going to say, I think in our business model, we have all three. We have trade secret, we have patent, and we have trademarks. And all three are critically important. I think anything that pertains to the IP, the intellectual property that you create, if you do not do one of those three things, you are basically giving away your idea. It is a way to preserve your business, but most importantly, it's a way to protect your business. You know, especially as Matthew said in healthcare, and especially in healthcare, it is when we're competing against companies like Abbott and Roche, which are producing 100 million test kits a month to, you know, inundate the world with COVID testing or influenza testing. How do we protect ourselves? And that the only way to protect yourself is by owning your IP and never giving up that IP. It is probably the most important thing in any of this discussion that we've had. The one takeaway point, I guess, for anybody starting up is patent, trade secret, trademark immediately.
Thank you, Bill. And Armin, you're going to bring us home with our final thoughts before we turn it back over to our host, Deepak.
I think Bill, concluded it completely, and I just agree with him. Very, very accurate. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank our fantastic panel, Inspiration to Impact. These four individuals, the companies they represent, reflect that theme, inspiration to impact. Let them be an inspiration to you in your invention, innovation, and entrepreneurship journey. Thank you for being with us today.